Well, should we start actually talking about the topic we were going to talk about?
Sure, why not? We're here. We're ready.
Raring to go.
If the rain causes us too much trouble on my one, then
Yeah,
so be it.
look, it's fine. Be
I'll try
grand.
not to make any faces that
Oh,
would
you can make as
pause.
many as you want.
Like when you're young and you make that face and the wind changes and your face will be stuck like that. Did you
Oh
ever get
my
that one?
God. Yeah. Well, my mom used to say when I crossed my eyes that they would stay like that, and then I was paranoid about it for years.
Yeah.
And I'd like get up in the middle of the night and check my eyes to
Oh
make sure they
no.
weren't crossed. This is
We
only
had
last
one-
year.
Oh,
No.
we had the other one was like, as a kid, you might be like, have your hair in your mouth. See kids doing that. We were told that if you did that, you'd accidentally swallow hair and then you grow a tail.
How?
I don't know. The logic wasn't there, but that's what we were told. Another one was like, if you accidentally swallowed like an apple seed,
It would grow inside
it
you.
would grow inside you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been self-sufficient.
Yeah. Impossible, but yeah.
Hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Too much battery acid in your stomach for that to happen. It's not quite the environment.
Yeah, it is not a welcoming environment for a seed. Anyway.
They were the main ones. I don't know if there's any more.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah.
So today, on what's the show called?
A Word With Yourself.
You got it in one.
Thank you. It's been a while, but I've gotten there eventually.
To be fair, have a word with yourself is the catchphrase, really.
I know. Yeah. But it's, yeah. I will be right from now on.
So what are we talking about today?
We are basically summarizing the actions and strategies that you can do to prevent any of the biases and fallacies that we have been talking about for the last few weeks ad nauseum, some would say. We don't know if we agree with them. But we're talking about some of the strategies that you can use that prevents like a bunch of them. So we had talked about how a lot of them were kind of the same, or at least like within, the same vein.
Similar,
and sometimes there's like a single thing you can do that will help kind of prevent like a bunch of them altogether. So watch out for the article that we're going to put out about this as well, but we will chat about it a little bit.
Keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah.
People will
So
be waiting.
and I think one of the things that's important to know is that, being susceptible to or having biases and being susceptible to logical fallacies and so on is not like a failing. It's actually part of our design.
Yeah,
as
part of being
humans. It's just that it can work against you as well. And whilst you don't have to like aim for this completely like perfect, robotic approach to decision making or whatever you're doing, it is helpful to be aware of them and think about a few little things that you can introduce to your workday that helps kind of ward them off, or at least address them if they were to come up. Yeah. So I have a list. A list of 5 things, which really isn't that much when you think about it.
Yeah.
Like
pretty
it's not
succinct list.
Yeah. It's not too crazy. So one of the things is about when you're making decisions, just the one I mentioned. Because this is one of the ones we talked about: confirmation bias, sunk cost fallacy, groupthink, right? Recency bias. Like there's so and more. There's like quite a few that come in under that, where it causes you to just basically not effectively weigh a decision, right? On putting more weight on stuff that really isn't that relevant. And so really, there's a few ways of doing this. So if you're approaching a decision, a good way to consider it is to think, if we were addressing this for the first time from scratch, what would we do today? Which can kind of help avoid things like sunk cost fallacy, confirmation bias, recency bias, and so on. And just kind of like take that beat, like it's very easy to rush, especially when you're under pressure, to rush through decisions. And I'm all for efficiency and productivity and creating like better, quicker ways of doing stuff. But I actually think when it comes to making decisions like this, it's the one place that you should pause. In fact, look at like productive processes and efficiency as a way to create time so that you do have time to pause in like decision-making cycles.
You build that in. Yeah.
Yeah. And then to kind of avoid things like groupthink, And some of those you really need to think about a way to potentially get anonymous input. And preferably before you go in to make that decision. So if you're posing a question to a group of people and it's like, okay, we can only afford coffee or tea in the break room, and we are going to come together and we're going to make a decision which one it is.
Tea.
If you were in that group chat together, meeting, whatever, virtual, in person, otherwise, there's a tendency for someone to be like, well, tea is the obvious best answer. I mean, it is, but
Only
and
varies.
you may not want to disagree with them because maybe they're the strong presence in the room, more than two people agree and you really feel like you don't want to be the first person to, like, all of those things that come into play. And so you should take an anonymous survey in advance to ask people what their preference is. There's like a simple example, easy peasy. Obviously, bigger decisions might require posing the questions, maybe having like a shared doc, like in advance, where people are kind of giving their input on it, so that when you come to actually make the decision in person, like all of the different views and opinions and kind of impacts are there already to be discussed. So like that's a great way of doing that.
Yeah, you're kind of saving time, aren't you, by getting all the things out there before you actually get together with the group.
You are, yeah. I mean, like, 'cause it's not just a good thing for making decisions and avoiding, any kind of like mental trip ups, but it's actually, efficient, right? I mean, how many times have someone said, this meeting could have been an email, right?
Yeah.
Classic thing. If you do this in advance, you might find that actually, your meetings can be emails, a lot of them. And or you either don't need to meet at all because actually the survey was overwhelmingly coffee, or your meeting's a lot shorter because everybody puts in their input. It's like, okay, well, it's kind of fairly clear what this should be. Does everybody kind of see the same information and whatnot? So that's kind of a good way to think about like decision making is, try to ask a question like, if we were to just approach this problem from scratch today, what would we do? Which avoids some of the other ones, and then try to get anonymous feedback or feedback in advance to prep the decision that you're making, so that everybody gets a chance to put in there as much input as they need to.
Yeah. And people have a tendency to be a little to avoid being uncomfortable, and a lot of these things might involve being uncomfortable in some sense, like putting out bad ideas, how could this go wrong, kind of negative things, but that will be a positive in the long run if you discuss them early on. So it's getting over that uncomfortableness and addressing things that might be issues but you just don't want to think about, so you're kind of automatically just going to a solution because it's easier, less difficult to deal with.
And then it kind of ties in as well is that, the notion of doing some of that information gathering in advance, of a decision being made. People are like, oh, I don't have time for that. And it's like, okay, but in the grand scheme of things, do you have time for a 2-hour meeting about it? You seem to think so, right? And do you have time for it going wrong, right? Like if you don't have that process locked down to make the best possible decision at the time, like do you have the time for it if you don't do that effectively? And so it's a bit of a, because it is, and like I have been guilty of this myself, of being like, oh, I really need to chat to these people about this thing and get their opinion and figure out what to do. I'll just throw a meeting on their calendars. And it's like, okay, there is a better way. I think it is just we do have an inclination to look at the easiest path forward, right? We're always trying to find easy paths forward. Again, something that can work with you and against you. And that's one of the ways of doing it. It's like, let's just get this on the calendar and then I'll deal with it then, rather than having to just put in the extra kind of 5 or 10 minutes to set up kind of a collaborative information gathering.
Interesting.
So not huge things that you would have to do. Again, it's very small things, but I think the return of investment on doing a couple of those small things is quite large, right? Because it tackles so many of them all at once. So then another one is if you are brainstorming or trying to solve problems. This is where the atmosphere is very kind of ripe for anchoring bias. We've talked about a lot. False dichotomies, and there's like a status quo bias as well of, well, we always do it like this, so we should continue to do it like this. That kind of attitude. And this is where you almost deliberately, again, have to kind of structure that brainstorming, at least in the beginning. So a good tip to do here in the beginning is to be like, okay, you're like, you know what, we want to increase our sales by 10%. Everybody give me ideas, right? And people instinctively will think of, well, what's the best idea I can come up with, right? And that's normal, right? And so you list them. The problem is then is like, now you have anchoring bias, because the first good idea that goes up, you know, feels like, you know, or they'll be like, oh, we can either do this or this. And it's like, oh, but maybe there's more options. So like, it's a real rife, possibilities are rife for all of those ones. Something that you can do, which is that you actually say, okay, like, here's what we're trying to brainstorm. Everybody give me your bad ideas first. Like, tell me what won't work. And so you get those out of the way. First of all, it's good to voice them and say, yeah, I considered this, but it won't work because of this, right? Because that can actually help just weed them out immediately, and that's helpful. But it also prevents anchoring bias. Because it stops, and recency bias, right? It stops people latching into the first thing that they hear. And that's great. And it also stops groupthink, right? Because someone latches onto a good idea in the beginning with anchoring bias, and then people don't want to disagree, right? And so you get people to get all of their bad ideas out first, and then you continue with the brainstorming. Like that, just that alone can be incredibly helpful, because you've kind of taken that weight and the air out of the room a little bit, and the tension out of the room, and now you kind of, it just feels a lot more free to just start throwing ideas out at that point. Another one then is, if you have kind of brainstormed, okay, it's going to be this, right? Is to ask all the ways that it could go wrong. Now, people don't like this. And understandably, people don't like it because it feels like you're suddenly aware of all of the risks. Yeah, and it's pessimistic. And honestly, you know, when in a brainstorming session, I think as a lot of people know, or problem solving, you know, you can get really excited and like rally around what seems to be the best way forward. And then to have to kind of take that excitement out of the room by saying all of the ways that it couldn't work or it might go wrong, like it's kind of can be counterintuitive. So it's a tip to help make sure that you do have the right decision, or that you haven't, and that you consider the ways that it could go wrong, because you might discover there's something there that is not just could go wrong, we have to, you know, have some risk mitigation. It could be like, oh, like crap, like we
need to be aware of this.
Existential, like this is a big problem, and it might actually change whether or not that's the best way forward. Small example, you're like, oh, you know, actually we actually want hot chocolate in the break room, not coffee or tea. Everybody's like, you know what, that's a great idea, that's wonderful. And then we're like, well, why would this be a bad idea? And then someone says, well, actually turns out we can't afford it. I'm like, yeah, actually, fair enough. We're back to coffee or tea, right? Like, so sometimes it could be something that's really that's a good point. Yeah, and then and actually following on from what you're saying, which is a really good point. Yeah, you get too far, sunk cost fallacy, it's hard to turn about. So it's really good to get those risks out of the way early, so like everybody goes in with open eyes.
Yeah, we promised everybody hot chocolate already. We sent out a communication about it. Yeah, we can't take it back.
Yeah, and then finance say, you know, it costs twice as much and you can afford that, right? And you're like, oh crap,
damn it, we'll have to give it subpar hot chocolate. That tastes terrible.
Yeah, or just go back on our promises. So, you know, it has different things. So it's really good to get that out of the way first. A lot of the time it will just be stuff that you need to be aware of, or you need to just mitigate. But it's good to have those in place early, so that you're not scrambling if you do then hit it at a later point. And again, you know, if you're stuck between two options, like so if you run into false dichotomy, one, be aware that a false dichotomy could exist, and then just really, really explore whether or not there is a third option. You know, so, you know, a great one that I think happens a lot lately, at least I have seen, is, you know, we must reduce our staff by 20% or, you know, we're going to run out of money. And it's like, okay, I don't think those are the only two options, right? Realistically, in the grand scheme of things, it's actually sometimes the quickest way to reduce costs, right?
Yeah.
Staff's a big one. But it could be things like, oh, but Mike, what if we extended our runway through a loan? What if we looked at outside investment to extend the runway? What if some people want to, like, maybe we actually offered out that some people might want to go part-time? What if we look at like eliminating one of our product offerings? Right, so we reduce our operational costs there, and you know, tons of different things. Or is there any way for us to increase our output
efficiency? You
know, that we haven't considered. And so like there are third options there, right? And it's always very useful to explore that. So again, yeah, this one, like when you're brainstorming solving problems, this one is very, again, simple things, try and brainstorm your bad ideas first, which gets rid of a bunch of kind of biases straight away. Make sure you explore the risks so you don't get too far into an idea and you really are sure that it's the right one. And make sure that you don't get locked into this or that scenario. Like, do explore if there are other options that you want to consider. And that's not that hard, right? Like, and if you consider that one and even the decision making together as one, that's really like 4 or 5 things you could write down in a notebook, before every meeting, just to be like, oh, have we talked about the bad ideas? Have we explored the risks? Have we, considered, have we gotten locked into a false dichotomy, right? And so on and so forth. Have we considered what we would do from scratch? So on and so forth. Like,
those
that's
simple things.
It's not, I don't think it's too hard. It's just being aware of them and kind of pressing them forward. Yeah.
I think, that's exactly right. Being aware of them is like half the battle, even, even if you're not quite sure what to do with the information, whatever, at least you're aware that all these different things exist and you can try to mitigate them somehow.
Yep. The third one is when you are hiring people or doing some sort of performance management. So really, as it relates to how you're like dealing with people, like assessing performance or experience or skills or whatever that looks like. Here we're talking about the halo effect, and affinity bias and a bunch of other ones. Basically, and recency bias comes into play here as well, as it always does, as does anchoring, honestly. So like,
again, why don't they just have one general name for all this? I guess it's psychology.
So like you're doing an annual review and they just recently completed an amazing project and you're like, oh, these guys are amazing, right? That's recency bias. It's also halo effect, right? Or like, oh, I remember when they started, they were great in their first 2 weeks. Like, I love this person, not paying attention to the fact that they've gone downhill since then, stuff like that. Or the flip it around, like, oh, they really struggled in their first few weeks. Like, I don't think these people are like a great fit. And it's like, oh, they've actually been like surpassing all their goals since then. It just they had a slower start. So, stuff like that. Basically, again, like in the way that we're predisposed to find the easiest way out, our brains just like something that is easy and makes sense and feels comforting, like it's not too challenging to our brain, right? That's it seeks those things out, and so you do kind of have to counter it. Now this one is not as easy as the other two, which we could argue is one. We'll keep reducing it down. This one you really have to put some structures in place. So if you really, when you're thinking about either recruitment or performance management, you kind of do have to look at standardized rubrics, right? You do have to look at being able to create maybe an objective scoring system, right? Or something like that, where you really can assess the performance and not the person. Because, this is where ad hominem, can come into play here as well. Right. And so one of the tricks that can come up is thinking about what someone did rather than who they are. So if you might say, oh, so and so is really unreliable. And that kind of feels, you're really talking about like you're saying the person, as opposed to saying, what, they were late 3 times this month.
Yeah.
Right. You're focusing on the events that they did. Yeah. And so like, it's always good if you find yourself using statements that's about like they are, like who they are as people, as opposed to what they did. It's good to try and change them over to what they did. And that can also help create those standardized rubrics as well. And those scoring systems.
More like an opinion rather than actual facts, right? Saying they're unreliable is like my opinion. Yeah. But the facts are they were late 3 times.
And it also, like, it helps counter the halo effect and ad hominem as well, because you could be like, you might have this impression of someone who's like, oh, they're really unreliable. And you'd be like, okay, well, I'm looking at the data and I can see they were late 3 times. But then you look and you see somebody else who you thought you just really like and thought was great. And you're like, well, they were late twice. That's not that much of a difference, right? And so it can actually help you yourself realize stuff by by going back to those data and standard ways of measuring people and what they actually did. Because you might realize something about yourself that you didn't know, and you might realize that you might have been unfairly considering somebody because of either, the halo effect, or ad hominem or fundamental attribution error and stuff. So that one's kind of like, it's not as simple as the other ones, but this is important. If you want to be a good manager, this is like non-negotiable. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's you do not get to be a good manager of people if you haven't solved for being able to like hire and give feedback and manage people's performance effectively based on their actual output and their performance and not them as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So like this is not optional. Like this is just it's more work, right? But if you don't do this, you're not the best manager you could
Yeah, you're
be.
not performing as you should.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I say as I use an "are" statement as opposed to a "did" statement, but okay, do it myself.
But yeah, managers should technically be able to get the people that work for them to do the job, well. The way they
Yeah.
communicate feedback to them, things like that, should be able to communicate to them, I need you to do this, I need you to do that, you're not performing correctly or well
Hmm.
enough. And the way they give feedback should kind of motivate the person to do X, Y, Z. So yeah,
Hmm.
again, it's hard to have those skills as a manager.
Hmm.
And
And
that's why.
also, honestly, it makes your job as a manager easier. And I think this is
Mm,
maybe where people don't think about it. But if you're able to
hmm
go to someone with like I don't know, like a list, right? A checklist, and you have 90% of it checked off good, but there's a few things you're like, oh, you didn't do this thing, or
mm,
like this thing
it's
was
pretty good.
late, or whatever. It actually makes your life easier as a manager to be able to give very like structured, constructive feedback to
Yeah.
people, because it's also like as a manager to go to someone and be like, oh, I'm just not happy with how you're performing, and someone's like, well,
hmm
well, well, why and how, and
hmm
you need to have an answer for that, and it can't just be vibes,
Yeah.
right?
Why not? The vibes you're giving me are that you're not very good at your job.
Yeah, right. So yeah, so that's a good one. And again, there's like a host of biases that
hmm
you kind of do that. And it's tricky as well. Like I was in a company that had very, very standardized recruiting system with like really standardized rubrics, and people were trained on how to question and then score those rubrics. And it worked incredibly well in terms of objectivity,
hmm
but it took a really long time.
hmm
And so, you do kind of have to balance that as well.
Yeah.
But you do the best that you
Yeah.
can with what you have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's never like it's never easy to do things better. There's always going to be some kind of challenge or
Yeah.
extra effort that's going to have to be done in order to, do things better.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, so the next one in a kind of a similar vein is when you are communicating with people generally. And obviously we specifically talk about it in the workforce, in the workplace, but some of these things can be applied outside of that as
Oh
well,
yeah.
where, your mileage may vary. Um, but, communicating with people can be tricky because, again, we're not robots.
hmm
We are human beings with hosts of complex feelings and emotions, and
Everyone's
that
are
is a
different.
fact. And so you do have to try and temper that when you're at work so that, things don't get into a heightened state,
hmm
and particularly communicating in conflict, right? To be, obviously if everybody's all getting along, then that's fine. Um, but things like straw man arguments and there's something that we didn't really talk about too much, was it's called moral licensing,
hmm
which is this notion of deserving something or being entitled to something based on like previous actions.
Yeah.
So it could be just as simple as like, oh, I had a really hard 2 days. I deserve to just like not do much today. And honestly, sometimes that's fine, right?
I could say
The,
that
the
sounds so
problem,
familiar.
yeah, right. The problem is that if you see somebody else having a less intense day and you judge them and say they're not hardworking,
hmm
so like you're creating a double standard that you're okay because of moral licensing, but
hmm
they're not
hmm
entitled to do it and they're just wrong for doing it. So that's where moral
Yeah.
licensing becomes a problem. And then also, trying getting too emotional in arguments. Now, people have ironically mixed feelings about this, um, but appeals to emotion in the workplace are really unproductive.
hmm
That's not to say we all have to be walking around like robots. That's not to say that things can happen that like really do create like hurt, right? And harm
hmm
and all of those kind of things. Um, but as soon as it kind of ventures into like an emotional place, it becomes less productive,
Yeah.
And this could be as bad as like your manager guilting you into things. Like that's,
hmm
very much an appeal into emotion, right?
hmm
Like, or a coworker basically saying, oh, asking you to do something because and trying to make you feel bad for not doing it for them, or like
hmm
all of that. Like it's unproductive.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the ways to try and take down the temperature in a lot of these communications is to really take some of the emotional triggering words and stuff out of things. So this is also applicable outside of the workplace too. But you hear people like, oh, well, you always do this, or like you
Oh,
never
yeah.
do this, right? Don't do that.
Yeah, that is triggering
Yeah.
for people, definitely.
It's you're creating drama for no reason, because you can just as equally state the factual thing that happened.
Yeah.
Right. So that's people getting like emotional and stuff, and it's hard. This is like easy. This is one of the ones that's easy on paper and harder to do, and it's all about emotional regulation and being able to kind of like take a beat and communicate, a bit more objectively. There's one thing here. So when I was reading up about this a little bit more, there was something that I hadn't heard the name. I didn't realize it had a name, but I do this a lot. Not just in conflicts and communication, but just generally, because I think it can be helpful. So you basically repeat back what someone says to you in a way that
mirroring.
kind of mirroring, but in a way that gets everybody to agree on like a main point, right? And so, I'm trying to think of a good example. So if someone says, I don't know, we have to have coffee in the break room because, tea is just slightly dyed water. You could say back to them, okay, so what I'm hearing is that you feel like tea maybe doesn't have as big of an impact and isn't as like maybe as flavorful as coffee. Like, is that kind of your concern? So you're repeating back what they've said, but in a way that like they would agree with, but it takes the temperature out of it a little bit.
Yeah, it's not aggressive kind of,
and it's not aggressive. And the thing is
or passive aggressive.
Or passive aggressive, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is about this is it makes them pause, right? Because they either have to agree with you because they have literally just said that. So it forces them to commit to that opinion. Or what can happen a lot in conflict, which I've seen and I've used this to great effect to this point, is when you lay it out for them like that, they kind of go, oh no, but that's not what I meant. And so they might actually walk it back. And so if there's like that, if there's an argument maybe like rising and you kind of employ this tactic, it forces everybody to be like, oh, so let's just take like, is this what I'm hearing that you're saying? And they say yes, right? In which case, okay, well, let's like explore that a little bit. Or they might say, oh no, I didn't mean that. Like, and a lot of the times people will back down from a point if you do that, and it can be helpful. Anyway, apparently it's called steel manning. I didn't know this.
Oh,
yeah. Didn't know there was a name for it. I was just doing it anyway.
That's such a random name as well.
I guess it's kind of like steel manning, like you're just kind of creating a very hard, flat surface for something in a way. I can kind of
you're really putting it out there, like it's just
it's just okay. So is this very like objective? Is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense. Kind of makes a lot of sense. It kind of it's sometimes this happens when it's kind of an offshoot of this. It's not really relevant to like a bias or a fallacy, but where this kind of similar thing has great effect. When someone tells a joke and it is racist or sexist or whatever,
generally
one of the ists. It's not it, basically. I have found one of the best ways of dealing with this, especially if it's in a group, is to not laugh and say, oh, what was that? Say that again. And then get them to repeat it and then be like, and if they, oh, it was just a joke, you'd be like, oh, but can you, oh, I didn't understand that. Can you explain it to me?
Oh my God. So awkward.
Because then people are like, you kind of look at them and be like, oh, I don't understand.
Yeah.
And then they'll say, it's like, oh, it's just a joke. It's like, oh, but I didn't understand. Like, oh no, I get that it was a joke. I just didn't understand the joke. Can you like explain it to me? And normally people have to explain the fact that they're misogynistic. They don't.
Your intonation kind of signaled it was a joke, but I don't.
Yeah, just you literally genuinely confused. Be like, oh, I don't understand. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a little side quest, but I find it's a similar tactic where you're just now that latter one is being very facetious and petty on purpose, but I think it forces people to confront what they have to explain what's funny about it, and normally they realize that actually, yeah, no, that was a really shitty thing to do, and they back away from it, which is right and good.
Think about their
general but like steel manning in this is like when you're repeating the other, what the person has said back to them in a way that they would agree, it does force them to either it calms them down a little bit. It kind of forces them to either say, yes, no, that is what I'm saying fundamentally, or like, actually, no, that's not what I'm saying. And they kind of back away from the point a little bit, which is also helpful. So, yeah, steel manning. Didn't know it had a word. Didn't know it had a name. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's very similar to mirroring, obviously. Yeah. It's funny you say that, because that was another one of the FBI negotiators' tactics too, the steel manning type thing.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, just clarifying what the bank robber.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
you're saying
exactly.
This. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're not saying, oh, I agree with like da 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 da.
Yeah.
You're saying just so I understand what you're saying. Like
exactly.
Yeah. A lot of the time I do is like, so what I'm hearing you say is this, this, and this. Exactly. Now they're saying, that's very useful in communicating, especially conflict. I actually have used it a lot in like negotiations or in brainstorming or decision making, mainly because, it's not because it's a conflict environment, not because of tension environment, but because I find that people misunderstand very easily. We all do. Yeah, it's really good to like clarify it and just like lay it out. It's like, okay, so you said this, am I understanding it correctly? You have said this.
No misunderstanding there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very smart.
We don't come up with them all. Yeah, I know. Did you notice the silence?
No, like
next
I
time
know the
I
motion of the arm.
Yeah.
My arm disappears. This background's kind of gone a bit mad. Sometimes I don't have a shoulder. Sometimes I do. But look, who needs two shoulders?
Only need the one. Carry the weight of the world on one of them.
Look, I do. Anyway.
So yeah, the next one is when you are reflecting on a situation or reviewing a situation. So in the workplace, this looks like you made a decision, you've gone ahead with a strategy, and then it unfolds, and then at the end of it, you're reviewing the outcomes and what happened. There is a tendency, and like, there's a couple of friends of mine that we do this all the time as a joke, but like it's funny because people are inclined to do it, where there's a tendency to, in hindsight, claim that you knew this would happen.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I knew that was going to happen the whole time.
But I never said it.
I saw that coming, right? Or whatever that is.
Yeah.
I told you so, basically. Right. So I told you so is strong in people, us people generally, right? Do not exclude myself
people
from that.
Love and I told you so.
Love and I told you so.
I love and I told you so. I can't help it.
Same. I love and I told you so, especially if I have said it.
Yeah.
So it can be tricky because when you're looking at events in hindsight, again, people we're awful at this. There's the tendency to jump through the hoops to make yourself feel better. Because again, your brain wants comfort and ease and all of those kind of things. And so, it's things like, maybe not attributing fault correctly, right? And doing and looking and reviewing in a way that makes yourself as least wrong or least bad as your brain can do. So it's mental gymnastics now, sometimes to a tiny degree, sometimes to a big degree, right? You see a lot of it now where there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I mean, I voted for him, but I didn't vote for all of this stuff that was happening. That was never meant to happen. And then people are like, he literally said he would do that though. So it's mental gymnastics, right? To ease yourself. We as people, we struggle with being uncomfortable. And one thing that can make a person uncomfortable is this notion of was I wrong? Was I the bad person in that situation, or did I do the bad thing? Yeah. And it's hard to sit in that because guilt and shame are obviously big things. All of that kind of stuff. This is very, very normal. And then of course in a workplace, it's heightened because you're trying to perform well.
Yeah.
So you don't want to look like you're not good at your job, or you make bad decisions, or, and so on. And so because of that, we tend towards being biased when we're looking at hindsight. We're a little self-serving, right? When we look backwards as well, and have a tendency to make ourselves look better. So that's normal, but
to a certain extent
useful.
Yeah.
Normal, but not helpful. And honestly, this one kind of really is looking at how you improve as a person, as a employee, as a person. You are not going to get any better or improve if you continue to just lean into those biases and not have, kind of self-accurate
excuses for yourself,
Yeah. One of the ways apparently that helps with this, and I have not tried this, So this will be something I might try soon,
But you've never
which
made any
is,
mistakes.
well, of course, that's right.
We've never had to try it.
That's a good point, Leslie.
If I were to make a mistake, this is what I would do.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry, tell us.
If you have made a decision to do something, right? Or you've come up with a plan, right? So say like in marketing, you're like, okay, we want to achieve this number of qualified leads. We are going to do X, Y, and Z to get there. And you've made that decision. And no decision is perfect, right? There's always going to be like pros and cons to anything that you're doing. What you are to try to do is to write down before the results are in your thoughts on it. So like what you predict will happen, what are like maybe the tolerance, like so the worst it could go, the best it could go, in your opinion, like based on everything, and guessing what the outcome is going to be. And you do that before the results come in. And then when the results come in, you compare those two things. And so it'll do a couple of things there. It doesn't help you necessarily with that decision a time, but if you do this every time, then over time, you probably will get better at predicting outcomes because you'll see where your gaps are. You'll see maybe where your blind spots are, right? And you'll naturally improve getting better at predicting outcomes, or at least understanding where your blind spots are so you can watch out for them in the future. So it just helps you become more self-aware. And that's can only be a good thing. As we've talked about before.
You can also show whoever it is your notes and say, I told you so.
Yeah.
And look,
this is something that happens, like you see this oh my God, you see this so often in startups. So, and I think this is something that actually contributes to the halo effect a lot, specifically as it comes to like founders and startup CEOs, especially serial founders and serial CEOs.
You're going to say serial killers for some reason.
No.
And just eating cereal.
But maybe,
yeah,
maybe I think too. I don't know.
There's a strong correlation there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
where they haven't reviewed accurately. So their startup becomes very successful, and they say, "That was me. That was me. It was because of me." Right? We knew it would be successful the whole time. We're just really good at picking a strategy. Like this was like we made the correct decision on purpose with our eyes open, knowing that we would be very successful, and it's because it's on our absolute merit that this happened. Or the other way around, when somebody fails in something, again, it can be attributed to, it'd be like, oh, well, that wasn't our fault. It was the market conditions. It was, this, it was that. And all of those assessments being not the full picture, of course. And so when people might go from one successful startup to another one and be like, well, I now feel like I'm going to be successful in everything because I was so right that time. It was all me. That's where things get a little dicey, because people underestimate how much luck can play into stuff working out or not, right? Luck and timing are a big percentage. Not that you can't be prepared and have good strategies and put your best foot forward really in as much as you can do in advance, but luck and timing play a huge part of it, and people don't really assess that as much. So, I mean, and I also think that like there's not many people who might say, look, we decided to try this. We had no idea how it would turn out, but luckily for us, it did. You don't hear that enough because people aren't willing to admit that, even though they were successful. And when they are successful, people are very quick. I mean, you talk about kind of the fact that there's, higher percentage of like, narcissistic traits in CEOs, right? And entrepreneurs. When you have those kind of personality traits in a high representation in these groups, of course, they see a success. They'll be very quick to attribute that to themselves, right? And to take the credit for it. And so that compounds their problem. So it's reflection and review. You want to do it accurately. You really need to, it's something that you put in place over time. Again, that's not, in terms of things, that's not a big thing. It's really about self-improvement. It's a tricky one in the environments that we would potentially work in startups and small businesses, because there isn't really room in the culture as it stands today for people to reflect and review accurately and objectively, because there's always a spin put on something. And so this is something that's not that difficult to address, but culturally there isn't really a lot of space for it, which is a shame. Yeah,
it's a culture, And the funny thing is, the more open you are to sharing kind of like your failings or your shortcomings, people are more likely to respect that and trust you. Whereas
Hmm.
somebody who's like that narcissist leader or CEO or whatever, that is like, oh, me, I did it. Yeah, my strategy was perfect. Like people are gonna kind of hear alarm bells with that. So
Yeah.
yeah, having a bit of self-awareness there can really make people respect you more.
Although I think that's also culturally like we're,
Hmm.
in what we're used to coming from Ireland and that kind of Western European culture of work. And I think Canada a little bit to a point because it's got
Hmm.
a lot of like influence there.
Hmm.
Um, it is people do seem to trust you more if you're willing to admit something that you were wrong or something was luck or
Hmm.
whatever, that you don't know something. But
Yeah.
I find that more into the United States and that culture, especially like around Silicon
Hmm.
Valley and that
It's
whole
valued to
atmosphere,
be.
it's
Hmm.
actually the other way around. They really value that kind of like bullshit, like
Yeah.
narcissism in
Yeah.
in
Yeah. That's true.
leaders.
Yeah.
And admitting that
That.
you were wrong or whatever is not appreciated as much. It's seen as
Hmm.
weakness.
Hmm.
Um, but hopefully that's something that could change over time.
Yeah. They need to realize that it's actually more of a benefit than and not a benefit. What's the opposite of a benefit?
A hindrance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
in this context, a hindrance. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
doing this creates accuracy, right?
Yeah.
And to me, accuracy can only be a good thing when
Yeah.
you're trying to forecast performance and forecast,
Hmm.
margin and revenue and growth and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Accuracy is your biggest and best tool in that. And this
Hmm.
is a way to make sure that's accurate. But, there's a trait of personality in there
Hmm.
that can counter this quite a lot
Yeah.
as well. So,
You're right. Actually, the accuracy thing is a big thing. 'Cause if you're attributing success to the wrong thing,
hmm
going forward, you're
hmm
not going to continue that success or be able to kind of
right.
build on it, right? Because you don't
Yeah.
have the building blocks there of successful
Yeah,
strategy.
exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. And that's
Hmm.
it. I
That's
know we
it.
talked for a bit. It seem that long, but it's not that many things. Not really.
No, no, no. But like they all relate to each other, so it's kind of like just doing a summary of everything and how they
Yeah.
relate. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I still come back to I think that the biggest defense you have against any of this is knowledge.
Hmm.
Because I like realizing they exist helps
Yeah.
you in the moment
Exactly.
kind of
Being open to
spot it
learning
out.
more.
Yeah.
You don't know everything or
Yeah,
anything,
yeah.
as you said, and being open to learning more. Yeah, can't be a bad thing.
That'd be a bad thing. Yeah. And just
Not
little
at
things that
all.
you can put in place to
Hmm.
help you out in your day to day, and that's the
Yeah.
best you can do. So, I mean, I wouldn't advocate for doing anything necessarily more than that. I mean, you can if you have the time, but you
Yeah.
know, at the end of the day, you still do have to do your job, and you have to do things at a relative speed, and you have to, and
Hmm.
so on. And so there are small things like this that you can do throughout your workday that helps, but you
Yeah.
don't need to over egg it,
Yeah.
right?
To the
It's
best of
a
your ability,
yeah, yeah.
you can do it
And it's
on what
scale as
makes
well,
sense.
right? Like if it's small little decisions that don't have a massive impact, then
Hmm.
don't worry too much about it. Do the best you
Yeah.
can. If you're talking about like we're setting the 5-year strategy for our company, then yes, spend more time making sure you're avoiding them. So like, it's a question of scale there as well.
Yeah.
And
It's tea versus coffee. Maybe
yeah.
don't spend months on a strategy for it. Or do if it's really important to your company.
Yeah. I
And it's
mean,
all subjective.
yeah. And also within all of this, I think what is important in even though we spend a lot of the time talking about these, we spend a lot of time saying just be aware of them, they're important. But I actually think which is also important is don't overthink
Overthink it.
this
Yeah.
because you can get stuck into like decision paralysis and analysis
Hmm.
paralysis. Probably heard that one,
Yeah.
and that really hampers growth and it hampers progress. And if you're working in startups and small businesses and where speed and nimbleness is of the essence, you cannot bog down that
Hmm.
process with analysis paralysis. And
Yeah.
so you have to be aware of them, put them into place, do it quickly, make your decision, and then move on.
Hmm.
Don't get locked into, big circular conversations to try and iron out every single wrinkle.
Yeah. Never
Don't
going to
do
be
that.
perfect.
That's not productive either. So there's like a balance to be struck in it as
Yeah.
well.
And even if you make a decision and it's not the right one, you learn from that and move on.
Yes.
It's
Yep.
never going to be, you're never going to be 100% right about everything. So
No,
it's
that's
getting
true.
over that, as you said, the paralysis of like, oh, I don't want to make a decision because either one could be wrong. I
Right.
mean, you're not going to know
No.
until you try something.
Yeah. Make decision, move on.
Hmm.
Yeah. The only thing you really be 100% in is that like, tea is better for the break room than coffee.
Only if it's Barry's though, because they have some English breakfast tea in my office and it's not
Oh,
great.
yeah. Yeah.
So I do drink coffee instead
Yeah.
if
It's
I've run out of my
also
tea
as
bags.
well like when people they're like, oh, we have tea and coffee. I'm like, okay, first question. Does my hot water for tea come out of your
Mhm.
coffee machine? Because if it does, you don't
That
have tea. You have
and
coffee
that should be
flavored tea.
illegal.
Yeah. And the water's never hot enough to brew tea either, because that
Hmm.
black tea has to be
It's not
done at a
steaming.
higher temperature. So, think about that.
Hmm. Think about that and come back to me.
It's like, oh, I love staying in hotels in like
That have a kettle.
Ireland and England, and they always have a kettle. And then I hate staying in hotels in the States because they
Have a coffee
never,
machine.
but they'll have a little coffee machine and they'll provide tea bags and they'll say get your water from there. And it's like, no, you've never drank cup of tea in your life if you think that's okay. Um, Canada normally will have both, which is nice. Or you have to
Best of
ask
both
for the
worlds.
kettle and it'll appear. But my mother she'll travel with the kettle.
Oh my God, are you joking?
No, 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 no. She'll have a travel kettle that she'll bring in case they
In
don't have tea.
emergencies.
And honestly, I used to think that was ridiculous. Now I
But
respect it.
honestly, I would nearly take one because usually the coffee machines and the kettles are disgusting in hotel
There's that
rooms.
too. There's
So I'd
that too.
rather actually, you're right. I did laugh at that at first, but now I take it
No,
back.
yeah, get a little travel kettle.
Yeah, I will. A little battery powered one in case I don't have any plug. My God.
Yeah. So that's it. That's all of them. That's the
That's
end of our
it.
series as well. I feel like we've
Yeah.
talked about this for weeks and it's the
I
end of an
know
era.
we've really, really beaten a dead horse. Really dragged it out.
Yes, yes, we have.
And that's not to say we won't think of more to talk about at another point.
To be clear, it's also not an exhaustive list. There are so many of these. We only picked
Mm-hmm.
out some of the more common ones in the workplace, but
Yeah, but you could go on and on and
yeah,
on and on.
if you
Yeah.
can think of it, there's a name for it.
Yeah. If anybody listening to this that has one that they think we should talk about, let us know.
Sure, sure.
That'd be great.
But we'll probably move on to something completely different the next time. Don't know
Yeah,
what
I think
yet.
so. Just change it up a little bit. Just
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
But it's
So
likely going to be about performance management and success routes in companies that are
mhm.
different from management.
Yeah, very topical right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, people are figuring out more efficient ways of structuring their workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we will talk about that. Something, yeah, I'm really interested in that actually. So I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Hmm. I can't wait. That's great. It was
Can't
very
wait to hear
formal.
Well, speaking of formal, what are your red flags and pet peeves of the week?
Um,
Or one of either.
you know what? I have neither. I'm gonna flip it on its head and say whatever the opposite of a pet peeve is, like a
Also, be
little
like
moment of joy.
your rose and thorn, so it's your rose or
Oh
whatever.
yeah. Is an unexpected power cut and you have to take the day off because of it. It's nice.
Oh, that is nice. You're like,
Because there's not many things to
can't
like
do anything.
about a power cut, but being forced into a day off is,
Yep,
you know what? It's nice.
it is nice. It was like
Mm.
when the building power used to go out when we were in the offices like full time. And you're like, well,
Well,
I have to go home.
guess I'm going home.
Yeah. It was great. And literally nobody could contact you.
Yep. So
Didn't
this
matter.
Monday had no power. Drove to the next town over, bought myself a Malteser Easter egg, and it was a great time.
That is a good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. What
Very
about yours?
positive of you. I
Hey,
don't have any positive ones.
Oh no.
Oh no, I probably do, but I was only thinking about red flags and pet peeves.
Well, did you have a red flag or a pet peeve this week?
Well, a red flag specifically for marketing and design that used to drive me up the walls was when somebody who wasn't in the area of marketing design and you're doing something for them would say, just make it pop. I'm like,
What
what?
does that mean?
You know what? I actually know what you mean, but I don't want to let you know I know what you mean because it's so offensive to designers or just a generalization of the skill of a designer, just make it pop. You're like, can you give me any other instruction? Like,
it's like, but what do you mean?
Yeah, but what do you mean exactly? So yeah, if you're a designer or a marketing person and you've probably been asked to make something pop before and you probably wanted to tear your hair out, but you have to be like, I will make it pop for you. So that was, my red flag of the week.
Oh my God, I wonder as a joke was that you could like literally create like pop-up cards, the the ones that you
Yeah,
open
the PowerPoint
and
deck in a
just
pop-up
you just
form.
give it to them. Like, there you
Oh,
go,
it
it
took me
pops.
literally. I literally.
You said make it pop. It's popping. What more do you want from me?
Just the text is just like, getting bigger and bigger. It's just popping out.
You know,
Oh
you
my
get those
God.
cards now that when you open it, there's
Yeah,
something like on a little kind of spring that it will actually shoot like confetti up and stuff. That would be a great one. Yeah, next time I would just take them at their word.
yeah, I think so. And yeah, that was it. I'll try and
That's
think
it.
of a good one for next week.
Yeah,
It'll
maybe.
be hard.
It'd be nice. It's nice to run out of them as well.
I know. Yeah.
Well, run out of the bad ones and have the good ones. Yeah, sorry.
I'm sure there's loads of good ones. We just take them for granted, right? We always put more emphasis on the negative than the positive things because
Yeah, because that's
just
how
the
our
way we
brains
are.
work.
Yeah.
And that is literally how your brain works. That's not
Yeah.
just mine and Leslie's brain. That is literally how
No,
brains work.
everybody's. Yeah, not just us.
Yes. Yeah.
So, okay, we'll be back with more from A
With
Word With
another
Yourself.
episode of A
A
Word with
Word With
Yourself.
Yourself.
That was great.
Oh, God. No one's coming back.
Never.
Okay, bye.